Welcome to the Think Fitness Life podcast, where the mind and gym come together to help you live your best life. Hosted by two fitness professionals and your personal trainers, Matt Gluckman and Eric Menchie. And we are back once again, Think Fitness Life podcast. This week, we're going to be talking ATP sourcing, deadlift, and digestion. Before we get going, we're going to talk about our weekly workout a little bit and then end with our food for thought. It's a little bit topical because we're talking a lot about food and energy systems. So, weekly workout. What you got for us, Menchie?
We got to hinge.
We do have to hinge.
We love to hinge. Hinging is great.
Yeah, last week we went over a lot of squat patterns, so it's just important to get both the squat pattern for the lower body and the hinge pattern.
And we'll dive into that more with the deadlift when we go over it, but changing it up. So we're building this program for the people listening. Now we have a day starting with a hinge.
So we start you off in, and it should go without saying that all these weekly workouts are going to need to include, you got to get warmed up. You got to know fascia work. You got to know inhibition and activation and movement prep and how to turn on energy systems before you get going, depending on what you're doing. But that should go without saying. And then, so we're going to start you off with an RDLs, so standing, and then work on your hinge pattern from there, weighted, whether it's front loaded at your chest or whether you're holding dumbbells at your side or you have a bar on your back. Actually, that does tend to be more good mornings, but I like
same pattern.
Front loaded.
Same pattern.
Yeah, exactly. Same hinge pattern. A front loaded RDL or a dumbbells at your side RDL or a barbell RDL. You're still working that same hip hinge pattern with the tension starting at the contracted portion and then eccentrically loading your engaged muscles, where the deadlift is kind of the opposite, which we'll get into. And then the next one we have is a single arm lat pull down.
Vertical
usually
pull.
Done on a cable or a lat pull down. Can be done in a half kneeling position, a tall kneeling position.
If you have bands, you can use bands. Just anchor it to something up.
Yep, absolutely. And then we have our deadlift, because why not, right? We talked about squat mobility last week. This week's deadlift mobility. Squats was in the workout last week, so of course we're going to include the deadlift in the weekly workout for this week. And then we end with some side planks. Super important. A lot of times people have trouble engaging and drawing in with those obliques on the left and right there. And that's really like your bookends that help keep this whole abdominal cylinder engaged. And we'll talk more about it later, but I just feel like a lot of times people have trouble staying engaged with their core when they're hinging versus a squat.
And that's going to be a key point we're going to talk about and why it happens.
Yeah. But let's get into ATP.
ATP.
Well, that's a big, fancy word drawn into three letters that basically means energy. ATP can be coming from fat, can be coming from glucose. Your body can convert proteins to create ATP. It's like the basic level of cell fuel for your mitochondria.
It is the fuel.
Well, yeah, right. It is the fuel.
You don't have ATP.
And then your body has processes to recycle its own waste and convert it into ATP. Things like the Cori cycle. And these are less efficient systems. So we just talk about the three primary energy systems: phosphagen, anaerobic, and aerobic. or you could call phosphagen your creatine phosphate. Your anaerobic could be your glycolytic, and your aerobic is your aerobic. It's more fats and some starches as well. Um, and take it away, Menchie.
ATP. Oh. So, what it stands for, because people, we throw it around a lot in the gym, and it's very technical, but it stands for adenosine triphosphate. So, we're looking at a structure with a nitrogen molecule, a ribose molecule, so adenosine molecule, ribose, and then three phosphate groups that are the tail end of that. And with those phosphate groups, they are pretty unstable due to the charge around it. That's why they produce a lot of energy. So when we break
Mm.
down ATP through hydrolysis, boom, we split that last phosphate off of the ATP molecule. We get ADP, and then we get a inorganic phosphate. We create energy. And when people think this is energy when we walk, when we step, when we breathe, but this is also energy for cell processes. This is energy for the sodium potassium pump to push gradients up and down gradient barriers. Sodium potassium. This is running all sort of cell molecular structures. If energy is needed, ATP is being broken down. On the muscle side of it, when we go to flex our bicep, when we go to shorten that muscle, ATP is breaking, splitting, we're creating energy so the heads on the muscle fibers can attach to the other side of the muscle fibers and pull and shorten. Boom. And then we need new ATP to unlock that muscle fiber, reload it, and cycle it again.
So, in case we lost you,
You might have.
yeah, basically the fact that this ATP molecule is so unstable, it makes it so powerful, or the potential for good energy. And you think about um, the dangers of like unstable isotopes in terms of like nuclear reactions and nuclear power. Um, I think it's really important to hear that process for people so they can understand kind of the foundational, um, like the baseline of how energy is consumed in the body, and then you get to get a better idea of how your body is doing and the feedback you're getting in terms of working out and feelings that you're having, or lack of strength or lack of energy, and comparing it with your diet and starting to look and understand food as fuel versus eating for emotional enjoyment.
Ooh,
Um,
tough one. Big tough.
it is tough. It
But
is tough. We go back and forth.
right. And
Everyone goes
that's
back and forth.
and when we get into digestion, we'll dive a little more into that aspect of why that happens. But back to the food as fuel, it all comes down to where ATP is produced, and that is in our powerhouse cells known as mitochondria. These things are badass. We need them to work efficiently, we need them to work properly, and if they don't, if we have mitochondrial dysfunction, that can produce some negative effects, aging, certain diseases, common complaints, and then especially the one I was recently reading was it can actually lead to certain heart diseases. Interesting. So, if the mitochondria aren't producing ATP, which 99% of ATP is produced within them, functionally, then we have problems because ATP is used in all cellular metabolism, cell death signaling, calcium signaling, um, biogenesis of certain molecules, certain nutrients. So it's very important to us in our body that we not only keep ATP readily available, but also make sure that the mitochondria are healthy. So, how do we keep mitochondria healthy? There's multiple ways. Probably one of the best ways is cardiovascular activities, repeated sprint activities, where you're tapping into the cell systems. We are using glycolysis. We are using the Krebs cycle. We are using beta oxidation. We are using all that stuff to create ATP. And we need to cycle through all those processes because it happens over and over again. And that's how we get this ATP.
Yeah, I think a lot of people spend a lot of time in the middle range. They're above the aerobic, they're below the creatine phosphate, and they end up putting a heavy load of a negative stress on their body. But it's been said multiple times amongst multiple professionals throughout history, Jack LaLanne and things like that. Not Joe Pilates. That's a bad example. Um, but how important sprinting is to the heart and to the system, and it's like full court press. You're putting a stimulus on your body where it has to operate and work together for maximum efficiency and maximum power output and performance. So you're just adding a good stress to your system for it to realize that it needs to work together, because there are a lot of ways that your mitochondria is busting out power for yourself, and there's a lot of different processes that can be stimulated, like autophagy is one of them. There's things called binary fission where your mitochondria can actually replicate itself because it's a single-celled organism. But I want to get to talking about kind of how ATP is stored as well as used. So a good amount of ATP is stored in the muscle and in the liver. And you also have ATP in the potential for ATP in fat cells. Well, yeah, everywhere.
You're right. Majority, I mean, because 50%, hopefully 50% of the body of most people is muscle or more, right? So ATP is going to be a huge storage in that muscle. That is key.
Right. So ATP being the baseline, but we got to think about aerobic system being fats, and your glycolytic system or your anaerobic system is more starches. I do not like the word carbohydrates.
It's a good word though.
I know, but I think it's
appropriate.
I think it sends the wrong message. It is appropriate, but it could be carbohydrates and starches from vegetables. They don't have to be like breads or pastas or wheat or rye or.
No.
And if they are wheat or rye in their natural forms, not grinded down into a powder and then baked into something. So I just I say it with caution. Carbohydrates, but think more fiber and think starches. You get plenty of carbohydrates. You can get carbohydrates through vegetables, not just like broccoli and things like that, but like sweet potatoes. White rice is a grain that is, if prepared properly, acts more as a fiber. If it's cooked and then cooled, it acts more as a fiber in the gut than anything else. And the benefit of these carbohydrates, fibers, starches, is it actually helps slow down the way that things pass through your digestive tract, which we'll get into more, and allow for your body to get its time in to absorb protein and fats for ATP, or to ultimately convert to ATP or just cellular repair anyway.
But that's it right there. ATP, food, and maybe we brushed over this too quick. Food is fuel. Literally, our body is taking food just to produce ATP. That's it. That's what we need food for. Obviously, there's other things, correct? But baseline is if I put something into my body, it's going to break this thing down so I can have energy to get up, to move, to walk upstairs, to cook my food. Like that's the innate reason why our bodies need fuel, which is food.
And we have to think of these three energy systems as like switches, because sometimes there's an inefficiency in the ability to fire on these switches, and they're all going to kind of work in conjunction with each other at some point, but problems occur when, we talked about redlining. There are potentials for you redlining because your systems of operating between these three switches is really poor, and we call that your general oxidative system,
Correct.
just being able to draw from ATP from these three primary sources. And like we said, there are a few other less efficient sources that create ATP. Again, like your Cori cycle is one of them. Um, but the idea is that you have these systems linked and you're operating at your finest. I think I see most often people are unable to tap into their aerobic system, and they're very much more keen on ATP from a glucose pathway than anything else in their body. And I love the analogy of glucose to ATP and fat to ATP between dry kindling and a log, like a wet log, because the dry kindling, the glucose to the ATP is so easy for the body to do. And so kindling burns really quick, right? For fuel. And then the bark, that's a log, that's thicker wood, it might still be damp. It's going to take some time for your body to take a fat cell, Krebs cycle it, and get ATP out on the other end. So if you think about how evolution happened, path of least resistance, your body is still operating in that fight or flight system of let's just do as little as we need to maintain, because we never know when we have to run from a bear. So what I typically see, again, back to those three switches, is that aerobic switch unable to turn on. Dude, would you agree, Menchie? What do you see over there?
Um, Agree and disagree. So they're like precursors. So I like the switch analogy, but people also have to realize that we're running all three systems at all times. So if you're blowing through the creatine phosphagen system, great, and then you're into glycolysis, and then your aerobic capacity. Like the end goal of the body, I believe, is to get to aerobic and cellular respiration to create a boatload of ATP from those substrates. So when you go through glycolysis, I mean, glycolysis is very inefficient. You're just producing quick ATP and then you're shuttling the byproduct into the Krebs cycle, into the mitochondria for oxphos. So oxidation phosphorylation. So to produce ATP, that's through that cycle. So glycolysis isn't really like that efficient because it's got to run through the mitochondria, but it still produces a good amount of ATP, getting into more aerobic process when you're starting to use oxygen. But what I agree with you, what you're saying is most people live in this glycolytic glycolysis pathway more often than not. So they're good in that system. Oh man, I can do 30 to 60 seconds and then recover, and let me repeat that, but my power output and percentage is going to go down. Okay, great. If you were to do that and keep that percentage up, I'd be like, your aerobic system's really good because it can now kick in the background and still shuttle ATP and clear that out fast. So it's good and bad. I would say people abuse the glycolytic system a lot. So glycolysis, because it's adaptable, but not that much. Where the aerobic system is very adaptable, and that's the system that more or less should be trained the majority of the time.
Hmm.
So, and then if you're not training the aerobic system efficiently, you'll notice that by just having these same workouts that you're not seeing improvements in. And it's all about measured um measured numbers. So where you want to be, are you hitting this number on the sprints? Are you getting this power output on the sprints? Are you getting this many reps in this time frame? That's stuff all that we and people need to do to see if they're making improvements, because doing the same cycle class week over week with no change in intensity, you're not seeing any progress in any of the systems. So that's where I think people, when we get back to that redlining, is problematic because they're just doing that. They're going all out and they're doing this for 6 to 12 weeks straight. They're going to hit that plateau at some point. Then you have to go and change and switch to a different energy system that you need to train. Maybe I'm going to focus more on the aerobic system.
Yeah. Yeah. I typically see the need for focusing on the aerobic system. And I just simply have people like that warm up with a 3 to 5 minute jog, kind of forcing them to do something mellow. And it's kind of funny because I have a couple clients that are like, the worst thing we do is that 3 minute jog you make me do right when we start. And that's a good sign because they're seriously overcoming that, like, that little barrier of going from a static state to operative. And I also see a lot of benefits with the sauna. Is really good at turning that aerobic system switch on. And another good little sign is your body fat mass. If your body fat mass isn't budging at all in any sort of way, shape, or form, or if it's only going up or if it's staying the same, and you're not already like below 15% body fat, then there could be a problem there. Why is your body unable to take a fat cell and use it for fuel? Why is it so heavily driven to the phosphogenic glycolytic system? And then just kind of going from there. So there are a lot of different ways to keep your aerobic system in check and make sure you're operating with these three energy systems and your body's being efficient. And there's other things that play a role too. Hormones play a huge function.
And I think where you said on the other side, so that's the exercise side of that. If you flip it into the metabolism side of this, you're 100% on. I mean, people are eating too many carbohydrates. So that's putting them right into glucose metabolism. That's what it is. So if you're all the time in glucose metabolism and your body's just expecting this, are we ever in a state where, hey, we're going to be burning fat? Are we in a fasted state? Are we in a state where maybe our carbohydrate intake was a little bit lower that day and we're going to rely more on fats? That's another important thing that people need to understand is, yes, you can do the workouts, but diet and nutrition play a huge role into how your metabolic processes work.
Yeah,
and people
absolutely.
need more fat oxidation in their lives. They need less carbohydrates. They need to train the systems to be good at, can I use fat as a source for ATP? Can I use carbohydrates as a source for ATP? Can I use protein as a source for ATP? Which all the answers are yes. Am I going to eat more protein this day and have low fats, low carbs? Sure. Am I going to have higher
Right.
fats?
What's my physical activity looking like today? Like, what's my focus? Am I just going to play soccer, or am I going to be weightlifting today?
Even if it wasn't, even if you could 100%, if you're for performance and looking for optimal, like, you're going to take that into consideration. But some average person, oh man, they're going to lift heavy. They're not going to know the difference from eating maybe, a bagel and a banana, like, versus like 6 eggs and a protein shake, because their body's going to have fuel somehow. It's going to figure out how to get that fuel and it's going to make it happen. And I think from what I've seen training some people is, people need to realize that they don't need to have this carb load for a heavy lifting day. They can survive off of eggs and an avocado in the morning and you'll be fine. So,
but that would probably be where calorically you'd want to make sure, like, the night before you had calorically adequate fuel in your system if you're going to try to perform at submaximal loads the next day. But if you're just the next day going for an aerobic jog or whatever, you're going to play a sport and you're not loading your system with heavy lifting, odds are the night before you can actually calorically stay pretty low and stay with vitamins and nutrients in like a big salad with some protein.
And even if you don't, I mean, I think people can still hit submax lifts. I mean, it's very neurological.
It is so true. It is so true.
I mean, but you're 100% on. If you're looking for performance and those numbers increasing week over week, diet's got to be dialed in. If you're this person,
You're so true because or you're so right because I mean I've done it. I've eaten
Yeah,
only spinach for weeks, and I've fasted for 48 hours and lifted
yeah,
crazy, but the consistency for that performance level required me to
correct,
recover with more food and more
correct.
calories.
Recovery is the point, and
Yeah.
there's always a little give and take. So I wouldn't say there's a right or wrong answer here. It's like too much
No,
is
not at
bad,
all.
too little is
No,
bad. But you got to understand that you can do both, but you can't stay in one all the time. If you're looking for your overall performance, recovery, diet, nutrition has to be on point for that day and the next day and
yeah,
the next day.
we're never promoting one way or the other. You got to stay in the middle path, unfortunately. But I think just rewinding back to something you said, it was really important about uh, the diet versus the workout because they can kind of go hand in hand, unfortunately, and it's a vicious cycle you got to break because if you're someone who has a sweet tooth, um, there are a good chance that your workouts are stimulating that. If you're just in your glycolytic and phosphagen system, your whole workout and your aerobic system isn't really being challenged, and you strengthened those two pathways, but haven't really focused on your aerobic system getting stronger, odds are your body's going to start craving those glucose and those carbohydrates for fast, quick fuel because that's what your body's using, and you're going to get it to a point where it's your shittier diet is going to make you continue your shittier workout pattern, and you got to break that cycle. You got to stimulate your and strengthen your aerobic system specifically and eat for fuel purposes and not for because sugar unfortunately uh, and refined carbohydrates are more linked to our dopamine pathway in our brain and can actually become a little addictive. And a good sign for that is the term hangry. We used to joke around about that, but that's actually a bad sign. Like if you're craving food and if you're emotionally changing your state or your mental state changes because you need food, that's a bad sign that your body isn't doing its job appropriately and it needs to send signals to it needs your brain chemistry to release dopamine in order for you to get what it wants, which is it's basically like a drug. I mean, they've done studies on rats with sugar and cocaine and heroin, and the rats prefer the sugar, but they light up the same pathways, and it's uh
Scary,
it's pretty crazy how
scary.
addictive it can be. Yeah, yeah, it is. But it's important to mention, like how you were saying about, um, you know, what you're eating versus what you're doing in your workouts because they go hand in hand, and that doesn't mean that you need to match perfectly, but you need to keep that in consideration if you're finding that you're having issues with your body composition, for example, or energy levels during the day, um, or just chronic inflammation and not being able to recover is another good little feedback tool. But yeah, the ATP, three energy systems. I think we kind of nailed that topic in the coffin. Do you have anything else you want to say before we move
I
on?
do not on
All right,
ATP.
let's go deadlift.
Oh,
My favorite lift because no matter what you do, that weight is on the floor, and if you can't hit it, there's something you got to do so that you can hit it next week. But the weight stays the same, and you just got to figure it out, right? I love it. I love it.
so good. I
But
mean,
it requires a lot of mobility. But yeah, so sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you. You're saying so good.
it's one of those exercises that you look back and people put it off today, that deadlifting and lower back, which I totally agree. But especially for like youth sports and sprinting and sports, I mean, that is a powerful lift to get faster and stronger. It is very underutilized, but we will get into that's why. It is like you said, mobility, great mobility. Doesn't require as much as the squat, a little bit different, but it's just a completely different movement pattern than the squat. So sometimes people might have easier time getting into the position, but executing the lift itself can be a little bit more challenging because of the mechanics set into it.
Yeah, the just debriefing on the deadlift too a little bit more. Um, it lights up your entire posterior chain, and posture and alignment is good strength. And you have to think about your central nervous system operating like your computer processor for the rest of the body and the mechanics of the body. And it's from your brain stem in the back of your head down through your neck to through your spine to the rest of your peripheral nervous system, right? And you have this basal root ganglia that's on the very edge of your spine all the way down, and that's where all the things are firing to operate your system. So sensory input into the eyes, sensory output through the neck and the rest of the body. If you can improve that stability and that strength in that posterior chain, you're going to be that much more efficient. You're going to be that much more powerful, and you're going to be able to perform at your best potential. And I think it's so important because it's the contrasting muscle. Like we move anteriorly all day long. We walk forward, right? We are anteriorly engaged. We to walk, you're literally controlled falling, and you're offsetting your spine to lean forward. And that's why sometimes you see older adults have this kyphotic look to them, and that just means a roundness in their upper back, and it looks like they're about ready to look at the ground, start searching for quarters, and that's not what we want. So we want to make sure that we are hinging and strengthening the deadlift pattern or the hinge pattern, whether it's an RDL, a glute bridge, a front-loaded RDL, a good morning, a deadlift, things like physio ball curls we'll talk about because of the I know that's why you get happy about that one. The ability to contract and shorten the hamstring as well, because the deadlift, we're in a lengthened hamstring position before we contract the muscle.
And that's just the
Um,
thing. As you mentioned, everyone's anterior. So everyone becomes or uses these muscles in our front of our body to pull. We're pulling forward. Posterior chain muscles are probably more important than those muscles because those are pushers. We like to push. Is it easier to pull something or push something? Well, if you ask me, I'll push something with my whole body weight. It's going to be easier than to pull. And then pullers, so if we're pulling, we're getting into that forward, internal rotated positions, heads forwards, kyphotic backs, arch backs. I mean, it's not good. And if we're not training the posterior chain movement pattern, we're not getting strong. We're not using the pushers. We're not using a whole set of muscle groups on the backside of our body that should help us propel us forward as we step, as we run.
so let's go into the deadlift mobility specifically, because that's what we're going to focus on. But everyone should know why you need to deadlift, and it's important.
Because people bend
So
over every day to tie their shoe. That is a deadlift right there. If you can't stand up or have issues doing that, I think it's time to deadlift. And I was listening to something the other day, and someone made a really good point saying, why do people move? Why do we do all these things? And he kind of said, well, as people get older, they need to be able to get up off the ground. And I listened for a second. I was like, holy smokes, he's right. Like, you falls create a lot of problems as people get older, or even midlife. If people don't know how to get up out of certain positions, what's that's hard for them. What are they going to do when
yeah,
they really need to? So movement and training is about longevity and health and being able to function and do all these things without limitations. That's why we deadlift. It doesn't have to be heavy. I'm not looking to have people deadlift 500 pounds and be the world's strongest man. I mean, if you want to, kudos, great, do it. But just getting that movement pattern in that down and back, that's going a long way. Even if we do a body
yeah,
weight, I'll take that
hundred
all
percent,
day.
100%. But so the mobility involved is going to be less about our ankles now If we think about the squat as a triple extension, ankles, knees, and hips, we can think about the deadlift as knees and hips, just more of a hinge. You're drawing your hips back using your glutes, and you're displacing your uh, knees so that your hamstrings are engaged, and you're able to keep your scapula stabilized so that your core is engaged, and that tension comes on your muscle and not on any place you don't want. So in terms of the mobility, we usually talk about hamstring mobility, just being able to lie down and extend your leg straight up in the air with your hip stabilized and your knee stacked on your hip and fully extended and your foot above your knee. You're in good shape. Um, if you can't do that, sometimes it's as simple as turning your core on because it's a little bit about motor control. Sometimes it's just about mobility and you just need to stretch your hamstrings. And sometimes it's neuromuscular a little bit, and you might need to address what's going on at your hips. And a lot of times, what I see is a lot of people working desk jobs and drive a lot and like to watch their kids play sports at sporting events or watch movies, right? So they're sitting a lot. And the seated position, I know we talked about it in a squat mobility day, but this isn't an end range position. So what happens is your body starts to try to be like a good it tries to be like a good dog. It tries to impress you and go ahead of the game and catch up to the stimulus that you're putting on it. So it tries to keep you at this position. So it's going to turn on your TFLs and maybe engage even like your psoas more. But basically muscles associated with your hip flexors, so that when you go to say hinge, you are unable to actively keep your glutes engaging, and you are um, getting your hips pulled down and pulled out of extension, um, thus maybe creating low back pain or hip pain, or just unable to find your hamstrings, unable to find your core, and that's all a red flag and a no go for deadlifting. That means you got to go back, foam roll a little bit, do some activation drills, stretching, and then get back out there.
And where people are really good at is when if I tell someone, hey, there's a kettlebell over there, go stand over it and pick it up, go deadlift it. A lot of times I'll get a squat pattern out of this. So instead of people having horizontal hip displacement backwards, they're just dropping
Yeah,
their hips down into more of a squat position. So
yeah,
what the big thing is hips have to go backwards with a rib cage that's stacked on top of that as the torso comes forward. Where a squat is the torso staying a little bit more in an upright position, but the hips are dropping vertical down. And that's where people get confused and have a tough time. People hinge all the time. They sit down, they do that, but they hinge squat and
right.
they don't know how to hinge and put their body weight chest forward over their knees and toes. That's where people get screwed up. And the ability to keep the glutes on and the hips in the correct position with the rib cage on top of that, that is where we need appropriate mobility stability to perform the deadlift correctly. Because if not, you can squat a deadlift all day. It's going to get to a weight where it's too heavy and that form just breaks down and it just becomes
Yeah.
someone either straightening the legs and trying to just pull it through the back and the arms, or them really just trying to squatting and it just does not look good.
Yeah, I mean, there are some applications, uh, some sports coaches, strength and conditioning coaches, will want that quad hamstring drive, and they'll purposely get people on hex bars and trap bars so that they can be a little bit more looking like a squat, but they're still
No,
deadlifting.
it's like the
So you're
in
not
between there. That's like this
right.
like a
It is.
sports specific like athletic position. Like that's actually a great
Yeah.
way. And I always, for deadlifting, I'm a very big trap bar guy. You know this. I
Yep.
live through the trap bar. Straight bar is fine too. It just creates a little bit different dynamics. Trap bar is safer for majority of the population because it will put them in a more neutral position with their arms and hands, and they can get
Absolutely.
deadlift squatty a little bit and then create power through the hips.
And the handles, you can use the handles up if you lack that hip mobility right now. But it's a really good way to also just make sure you're able to keep your scapula engaged, like you said, with the hands on the side there. But so, what do you have, Menchie, for the individual who stiff-legged deadlifts, stiff-legged hinges?
Stiff legged, so their knees don't bend.
Yeah,
So
and they're like, that's the only way they can feel their hamstrings.
that's the only way they can feel their hamstrings. Oh man. So that means that they're trying to create maybe more length to find and feel hamstrings as they're trying to straighten that knee out a little bit more. So when I see that, it kind of tells my brain, okay, if I flex their knees, do they not feel the hamstring anymore? Which means the hamstrings aren't acting on the pelvises to pull the hips in the correct position. So now I'm thinking as
Yeah,
I go up, are they more anteriorly tilted if the knees are bent? So that means it's going probably into the lower back, or it's going to feel like if I bend their knees and their hips go back more, they're going to feel like they're going to fall over. Stiff legged
yeah,
deadlifts, I don't, it's not my favorite exercise. It's still a good exercise, but I think it's kind of a cheap way to get hamstrings because you're kind of locking them in that straight position and you're going to feel them no matter what. But as soon as that
I
knee
think,
flexes, I mean, that hamstring
yeah.
flexes the knee a bit. That hamstring's got to kick in and hold the hip in the right position as you go. And that is a more dynamic athletic position than a stiff leg deadlift. Because if you, I'm going to ask you, have you ever seen someone run stiff leg? Be
No,
straight.
but
Neither have
but
I.
I- but what happens is that stretch, that pull, that muscle, that's how they think they're feeling their hamstrings working.
Correct.
But it's not working. It's just that you feel it because you're stretching it.
Exactly.
But I typically see like and we like to talk about the lowest common denominator here at Think Fitness Life, right? Like we want to be able to help the person who's just starting off. So that's why we're going down to every little gritty detail. But then take your shoes off and drive through the floor. Get that proprioceptors of your adductors because your adductors are going to help those medial hamstrings fire. And then when you go to hinge properly with the knee flexion, you should be able to find your hamstrings. And that's why the something like pairing a deadlift also with a hamstring curl, which I know we didn't include in our workout, but we tried to keep it simple for you guys, is really good in practice so that we can also strengthen the hamstring in a shortened position and work on the contracting, shortening the muscle as well. But we talked a lot about the deadlift, and I don't want to lose any time. I don't want to not be able to have time to talk about some digestion. So digestion's a little bit more straightforward, but before I move on, did you want to add anything about deadlift?
Start deadlifting. Practice the movement.
Yeah.
If you need help with it,
Deadlift mobility, excuse me, deadlift mobility, I should have
if you
said.
need help with it, reach out to us, Matt or myself, contact us. We will walk you through it. We will get you onto a deadlift program. Boom.
All right. So let's move on to digestion. It's pretty straightforward. From mouth to excrement, you have a big tube from your mouth to your butt going through your whole body. You have your gut lining is one cell layer thick. It's about the surface area of a tennis court. So if we're going down the chain, digestion starts in the mouth with chewing, swallowing. Your salivary glands are producing enzymes that start the digestion of most carbohydrates. Then it travels down your esophagus into your stomach. Your stomach has three main jobs of storing swallowed food and liquid, breaking down the food and liquid, and making it with digestion, making it digest, and then emptying the contents into the small intestine. Food will stay in the stomach for anywhere from 2 to 4 hours, and digestion can last anywhere from 6 to 8 hours total. Carbohydrates are going to stay for the least amount of time, which is important to understand
Very important.
because proteins and fats take longer to break down and then cross the gut barrier and be reconstructed. So then food passes from the stomach to the small intestine, which is where the nutrients are absorbed and transported throughout the rest of the body. And anything that can't be absorbed goes into the colon as waste matter. But most of your waste matter in your stool is actually dead bacteria.
Red blood
So we'll
cells.
talk about that at another date. But the one thing I want to mention on top of this is um, fibers and carbs. Fibers/carbs. I want to include them both. Pastas, breads, if you need to, right? But rice, sweet potato, these act as more fiber. They help bulk your stool to allow for the body to get more time to absorb those proteins and fats. Fats have their own process of getting broken down and passing the barrier and being used as fuel. And then you have your proteins, which are broken down into amino acids and reconstructed once they pass the gut barrier on the other side. Key point there is if your body wants say a certain protein, right? It's gonna manufacture it the way it wants. It's not gonna. You can't have. A lot of people do this with bone broth. They think that they're going to get that exact protein on the other end. It doesn't work like that. Your body's going to break the amino acids up the way it needs and then almost store them in little separate piles and just construct the next protein it needs based upon demand. And then the other part I want to mention too is just WGA is wheat germ gluten, and it's a small enough molecule to get through most people's mucosal barrier and cause damage to the gut lining and just make for improper and inefficient systems overall. They talk about immune system mishaps and misfirings and over regulating. You talk about poor absorption and just can cause just a host of many other problems.
Yeah. And kind of along with that is gluten. Actually, gluten is a protein that actually causes the cell lining of the gut to kind of open a bit. So it signals the cell to kind of open a bit, and that's where stuff can leak through. We get leaky gut barrier system. So when people say, "Oh, like gluten's not really a good thing," especially if you're eating a poor diet with gluten, it's gonna have the ability to open up your gut lining and then let stuff into your system. Plus, then you have the WGA just penetrating the gut lining and causing problems. And when you cause problems, we have little hair-like villi on our gut. When we have issues, intolerances, irritable bowel syndromes, certain irritable bowel disorders. I think that's the right word, right?
Yeah,
Actually,
IBD.
those hair-like villi actually flatten and absorption becomes less. So it's all about
Yeah.
absorption and how well we absorb things. Certain things we put in our body gets absorbed really well. And then if we're doing damage to the gut lining, absorption becomes problematic and it just passes through really quick. Hence why people have, they feel like they have diarrhea, they're going to the bathroom a lot because there's no absorption and stuff just cruising through the digestive system. Not good. So if someone is having those sort of issues, that is a good time to look at digestion as a whole of, okay, what am I eating and how can this be affecting how I'm absorbing nutrients?
And if you're having issues like bloating, constipation, or something as serious as blood in your stool, you definitely need to get someone to help you
Correct.
with what you're doing, because there's going to be a phase to which you need to stop the damage done and you need to then rebuild. And then you can worry about absorbing the proper nutrients. But, we talk about the digestion processes used, saliva, stomach acid, small intestine, pancreatic, and bile. Those are going to help break down different things: starches, proteins, and carbohydrates for the small intestine. and starches, fats, and proteins for the pancreas, and the liver is going to primarily digest fats. Something to note there is I have a couple clients who have had their gallbladder removed. This is like 20 years ago, right? And now in the morning they can't eat fats because their gallbladder actually holds on to bile to help break down fats for the next day, right? And sometimes you just need to actually start your system with exercise or eat a little bit of protein or carbohydrate for you to start the clocks for digestion to create those enzymes that are going to help break down fat. And there's one other thing. I love this topic, and I don't want to over convolute people here. I just think it's so important to understand how digestion works,
because every
to understand how you're fueling your system. And another resource that I want to promote is Dr. Gundry's longevity paradox is such a good insight into how and to zooming in and understanding how this is all working in a molecular level. And then a next step from there is there's a book by Dr. Will Cole called The Inflammation Spectrum, which is another one that helps break down the different systems of, your lymphatic system, your hormonal system, your energy systems, your skeletal muscular system, your autoimmune system. And then you can start, he has little questionnaires in there. He has ways of measuring the level of inflammation you're having now and different protocols and solutions. It's a really good book for anyone who's having any digestion issues. But I hope this made sense for people, talking about the ATP energy systems and the digestion. I think we did a pretty good job.
For the time we have, yes. Can dig deep into digestion.
Yeah, that's right. That's right.
Maybe for another
Well,
day,
we want to.
digestion.
Oh, we want to.
Boom. But
We want to give
where?
people just enough, but not too much, so that it's still digestible. But
I like what you did there.
that was my corny ass joke of the day. But yeah. So with that being said, anything you want? I think we're ready to wrap up, and then we can end with our food for thought.
Yeah, I'm good on my end.
Okay. Yeah, I don't think we need to. I think we said everything that needs to be said. Yeah. So, food for thought. We'll leave you with this note, and we'll see you next week. This was Hippocrates quote comes to play here. Let food be thy medicine, and medicine be thy food. That is all. This was your personal trainers, Matt Gluckman and Eric Menchie, signing off. Live long and prosper. We'll see you next week. Thanks for listening. We hope you gained something from this episode. Our mission is to help people live their best life, both physically and mentally. Check out thinkfitnesslife.com for additional resources and schedule a complimentary assessment with one of us. We're always here to help.